The sun had barely risen over the hills when Nia was already sweeping the compound. She moved quietly, careful not to wake Mama Sika. The chickens clucked near her feet, and the morning dew made the grass wet under her toes. Nia was 17, but her back already ached like an old woman's. She had never known her real mother. They said she died giving birth to Nia, whispering. She left with her last breath. Her father, Baba Kunnal, had tried to raise Nia alone for some time. He plaited her hair, cooked yam for her, and told her stories by the fire. But loneliness can be louder than hunger. So one day, he brought home a new wife, Mama Sika. She came from a far village, with sharp eyes and a colder smile. At first she seemed kind, offering Nia sweet plantains and singing soft songs. But once the wedding drums faded, so did her kindness. Mama Sika soon ruled the house like a chief. She ordered Nia to sweep before the roosters crowed, wash clothes until her fingers turned white, and fetch firewood from the thickest part of the forest. Nia never complained. She missed her father's laughter, but even that grew faint. Baba Kunnal had become quiet. His once strong hands now trembled when he spoke. He spent most days lying in the hut, coughing and staring at the thatched roof. Mama Sika said he was just tired, but Nia knew her father was fading like the evening sun. One hot afternoon, as Nia returned from the stream, her arms heavy with water pots, she heard voices near the compound. She stopped to listen. "Yes," Mama Sika was saying. "He's poor, but he has no wife. That's enough. I want her gone. She's still young." A man's voice replied. "She's a girl. Girls marry. That's their job," Mama Sika snapped. Nia's heart dropped. She knew Mama Sika had been planning something, but not this. That evening, Mama Sika called her. "You are to marry a boy named Jomo," she said, slicing yam without looking up. "He's from the next village." "But I don't even know him," Nia whispered. "You don't need to know him," Mama Sika replied. "You need to obey." Nia looked at her father, who sat coughing in the corner. He said nothing. His eyes were empty. That night, Nia cried into her mat. She thought of the dreams she once had, to learn healing from the old women, to sing with the village girls, to see the world beyond their trees. All of it was now slipping away. The wedding was set for the next full moon. No songs were sung. No beads were gifted. Only silence filled Nia's heart. She was the girl with no choice. Jomo lived far from the heart of the village, in a small mud hut near the thorn trees. His roof was patched with dry grass, and the wind whistled through its cracks on cold nights. He had no brothers, no sisters, and no living parents. People said he had come from another village long ago, walking barefoot with only a small bag and a wooden staff. He owned just 3 goats, a short hoe, and a water pot. His clothes were always faded, his wrapper held by safety pins, and his sandals made from old tire rubber. Yet he never begged, never stole, and never raised his voice. He worked alone, spoke only when spoken to, and nodded more than he smiled. The villagers often talked about him. At the market, women said, "That boy is too poor for anything, even to marry." Others added, "A wife would starve with him." But still, no one disliked him. He never caused trouble. He just stayed out of sight. Mama Sika, however, didn't care what the villagers said. She had made her decision. She wanted Nia gone. Out of her house, out of her care. Jomo was a simple boy with no loud family to demand a bride price. He asked for nothing but a peaceful life. That was perfect for Mama Sika. When the wedding day arrived, there was no drum, no dancing, no fattening of the bride. Just a quiet walk to Jomo's hut. A few words said under a palm tree, and 2 calabashes shared by the couple. Nia wore a plain wrapper, her hair barely oiled. Her eyes were tired. No one from her mother's side came. Only her stepmother stood with folded arms, watching. Jomo stood near the tree, his hands behind his back. He wore a clean shirt, though it had many patches. He didn't look proud, just calm. When Nia arrived, he bowed slightly. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Nia looked up at him. His face was gentle. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. His eyes were quiet, like the river before rain. She noticed something else, his sadness. It sat on his face like dust that never washed off. But it wasn't the kind that scared her. It was the kind that understood pain. After the short ceremony, Jomo turned and began walking. Nia followed. They passed the tall trees, the singing birds, and the watching villagers. No one threw flowers. No one clapped. As they reached the edge of the village, Nia turned to look back. Her stepmother was already gone. They arrived at the small hut. Jomo opened the door and stepped aside. "This is your home now," he said. Nia nodded. She stepped inside. They had spoken less than 20 words that day, yet she felt he had said enough. The poor boy from nowhere had a voice full of silence. The air was still as Nia stepped into her new life. There were no drums to welcome her, no women dancing in circles, no smoke from roasting meat. The village did not gather. No child sang songs. Her wedding had come and gone like a whisper in the wind. Jomo led her into the small mud hut. The walls were bare. A single stool sat in the corner, and a cracked calabash lay on the floor. There was no bed, no firewood stacked, no special meal waiting. Just silence. "You can sleep here," Jomo said softly, rolling out a mat made from old raffia. He placed it on the floor and stepped aside. Nia sat down and looked around. This was her home now. Her chest ached. She turned her face away and cried into her wrapper, making sure her sobs were quiet. Jomo said nothing. He sat near the doorway and looked outside into the darkness. That night, she didn't dream. Only the soft cry of an owl kept her company. The next morning, Jomo was already outside. He carried a small axe and walked toward the forest. Nia swept the room, fetched water, and tried to cook porridge from the small bowl of maize he had left. He returned in the evening with some firewood and a bundle of wild leaves. He handed her a small piece of roasted yam. "Eat," he said simply. She took it with a nod. Days turned into weeks. Jomo worked hard. He fetched water, chopped wood, and cared for his goats. He never shouted, never raised a hand, and never asked for more than she could give. When they had little food, he always gave her the larger share. Sometimes he brought fruits from the forest, sometimes herbs. He told her what not to eat, what to boil, and what to keep for sickness. His hands were rough, but his voice was soft. Slowly, Nia began to see him not as poor, but as peaceful. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were gentle. He respected her space. He never asked her to smile, but sometimes he watched her from the corner of his eye, like he wanted to see if she would one day be happy. But there was something strange about Jomo. Every few nights, after supper, he would quietly leave the hut and walk into the forest. He never told her where he was going. He didn't take tools or baskets, just a small cloth bag. He returned before sunrise, quietly slipping inside and lying down to sleep. Nia tried asking once, but he only said, "It's nothing." She didn't believe him. A husband with nothing should have nowhere to go. Yet he went, again and again, and each time, he returned with eyes that looked even more tired than before. Every 3 nights, just as the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky turned orange, Jomo would rise from his stool, tie a small bag to his back, and leave the hut. He never said much, just nodded at Nia and stepped into the darkening forest. At first, Nia thought nothing of it. Maybe he was collecting herbs or hunting for wild snails. But when she looked at his hands the next morning, They were always clean. No dirt under his nails, no cuts, no scratches. His feet, too, were dry. No sign of river mud, no forest dust. She began to watch him more closely. "Where do you go?" she asked one evening, trying to sound casual. Jomo smiled. "Just fetching firewood." Nia blinked. "At night? It's quieter then," he replied, looking away. But the firewood pile outside never grew bigger. Some nights, he returned with nothing. Other times, he brought just a few dry sticks. One night, Nia waited by the doorway as he left. She saw him glance over his shoulder before walking down the path. The moon was full, casting shadows between the trees. He moved quickly, the small bag bouncing gently on his back. Her heart began to race. The next time he left, Nia stood by the window hole. She saw him step beyond the last bush near their compound and disappear into the trees. He didn't look back. She waited. She listened. Nothing. The hut felt too quiet. The next morning, she looked for clues. The bag he always carried was missing from its corner. His sandals were placed neatly by the door, but his feet had no dust, no thorns. Something was wrong. The next night came, and Jomo did the same. He rose at dusk, tied the bag, nodded and left. But this time, Nia followed. She waited a few minutes, then wrapped her wrapper tightly and stepped out barefoot. She moved slowly, using the shadows as her cover. She stayed far behind, careful not to step on dry leaves. Her heart beat fast. Her fingers trembled. Jomo walked like a man who knew every turn. He didn't pause. He didn't check his path. He walked deeper and deeper into the forest, far beyond where people usually go. The moonlight flickered through the tall trees. Owls hooted from the branches. Nia felt sweat on her forehead, but she kept walking. Suddenly, Jomo stopped. Nia ducked behind a thick bush, holding her breath. Jomo looked around, then stepped through two large rocks hidden by vines. Nia crept forward and peered through the leaves. There was a faint light ahead. Jomo had vanished behind the rocks. What was beyond there? Why did he carry that bag every time? What was he hiding? Nia pressed her hand against her chest. She had followed him too far to turn back now. She had to know. Nia waited until Jomo disappeared past the thorn trees. Then she stepped out of the hut, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. The night was cold, but her heart beat fast with heat. She moved slowly, making sure the dry leaves didn't crack under her feet. Her mother had once taught her how to walk like a cat in the forest. "Step with your toes first," she used to say, "and listen harder than you look." Nia remembered every word now. She stayed far behind Jomo, just close enough to see his shape in the moonlight. He moved like he'd walked the path 100 times, never turning, never stumbling. The trees thickened. The sounds of crickets and frogs filled the air. Still she followed. After nearly an hour, they reached a part of the forest Nia didn't recognize. The trees here were taller, their roots twisted like snakes. She crouched behind a fallen log as Jomo stopped near the river's bend. The moonlight bounced off something shiny nearby. Jomo looked around, then pushed aside some hanging vines. Behind them was a wide crack in the rocks, a hidden cave. Nia's eyes widened. She had walked this forest many times and never seen it. Jomo stepped inside, his small bag still on his back. Nia waited a moment, then crept closer. As she neared the entrance, she heard something strange. Singing, but not just any song. These were royal songs. Old songs only sung during coronations and great gatherings. Songs her father once hummed under his breath when talking about lost kings and vanished thrones. Nia's body froze. She peeked through the vine-covered entrance. The cave was wide, glowing with soft yellow light from clay lanterns. At the center was a raised stone platform. Jomo stood beside it, pulling items from his bag. One by one, he took out a fine wrapper with gold patterns, a carved staff, a shiny chain with a lion's head, and a wooden box. He removed his ragged shirt and stepped into the royal clothes like he had done it many times before. He straightened his back and stood tall, taller than she had ever seen him. He looked like someone else. No, he looked like someone who had always been this person, just hiding under poor clothes. Jomo turned to the platform and opened the box. He took out a crown, not heavy with jewels, but smooth and carved with ancient symbols. He held it for a moment, then placed it back with care. Nia's mouth went dry. Her knees felt weak. Her husband, the quiet boy with 3 goats and patched clothes, was living a second life, a royal life. She stepped back slowly, heart pounding, afraid he would hear her breathing. The forest felt different now, like it knew a secret she didn't. She turned and walked away, every step heavier than the last. Who had she really married? And why was he hiding it? Nia walked back to the hut with her legs shaking. The path felt longer, darker, and colder than before. The trees whispered things she didn't understand. Her ears still held the sound of royal songs, and her eyes could not forget the crown. She entered the hut and sat on the mat, staring at the floor until the sun began to rise. When Jomo returned at dawn, he looked tired as usual. He said nothing. Nia said nothing. They ate in silence. That day, she moved like a shadow, sweeping without thinking, fetching water without noticing how full the pot was. Her heart was heavy, her mind full of questions. Who was Jomo? Why did he hide such a life? What kind of man wore rags in the day and royal robes at night? The next evening, when Jomo left again, Nia followed. This time, she moved with more care, staying deeper in the shadows. The forest no longer scared her. She had to know more. Again, he reached the hidden cave near the river. Again, he pushed the vines aside and stepped in. Nia crept to the entrance and looked through. But tonight, it was different. Jomo didn't just stand on the stone platform. He walked deeper inside. Nia waited a few moments, then followed quietly through the vines. Her eyes widened. Inside the cave was not just an empty space. There was a stone house, carved right into the rock wall. Its windows glowed with warm lantern light. The air smelled of roasted meat and burning herbs. And people, real people, were inside. 2 men in white wrappers stood at the door, holding spears. They bowed as Jomo walked past. "Welcome, my prince," one of them said. Nia almost gasped. Inside the house, more servants moved about. A woman placed scrolls on a wooden table. A boy swept the floor. Another carried a tray of fruits. All of them moved quickly, bowing whenever Jomo passed. He walked to the table and began speaking in a voice Nia had never heard before. Strong, deep, full of power, he spoke in the royal dialect, clear, perfect, and full of authority. "Send a letter to the northern village," he said. "Tell them we will visit after the full moon, and prepare the family shrine." "Yes, my prince," the servant replied. Nia stood behind the rock, frozen. The poor husband she cooked yam for was being called my prince? She stepped back, stepping on a dry twig. Crack! The sound echoed. She ducked behind a bush, heart thudding. No one came out. After a few minutes, she turned and ran, faster than she ever had before. She didn't stop until she reached the hut. That night, she lay on the mat, eyes wide open, staring at the roof. She had married a prince who lived like a poor man. She didn't know whether to be afraid or amazed. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky in soft orange. Nia sat near the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her heart beat like a drum, but her face was calm. Jomo stepped out of the hut, stretching his arms as he always did. He looked at her and paused. "You didn't sleep," he said. Nia looked up. "No, I followed you again." Jomo didn't blink. He walked over and sat on the stool beside her. The fire crackled between them. "I saw everything," she said. "The cave, the house, the people. They called you my prince." Jomo closed his eyes for a moment and sighed. "I knew this day would come," he said softly. Nia waited, her eyes fixed on him. "My name is not just Jomo," he said. "My full name is Jomari Adissa. I am the rightful heir to the kingdom of Olanga." Nia's mouth opened slightly, but she said nothing. Jomo continued. "Many years ago, our kingdom was attacked. It happened at night. Soldiers came with fire and arrows. My father, the king, was killed. My mother helped me escape through a tunnel under the palace." He looked toward the forest as if seeing the past. "I ran for days. I crossed rivers, slept under trees, and begged for food. Finally, I reached this village. No one knew who I was. I wore torn clothes and lived simply." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Nia whispered. "Because I made a vow," Jomo said. "I told myself I would not return to the throne until I found a woman who had a clean heart, a woman who would not love me for riches, but for the man I am." Nia's eyes filled with tears. "So, all this time, you were testing me?" "No," Jomo said, shaking his head. "I wasn't testing. I was surviving. But the day you came into my life, everything changed. You didn't complain. You worked hard. You shared what little we had. You treated me with kindness, even when you had no reason to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pendant shaped like a lion's tooth. "My mother gave me this before we fled. She said, 'When you find the right woman, give her this. Then go take back your name.'" He placed the pendant in her hand. Nia stared at it, speechless. Jomo smiled. "And now I have found her." Nia looked at him, tears rolling down her cheeks. All her pain, all her confusion, now made sense. She hadn't been cursed. She had been chosen. And the poor man she married was a prince in hiding. The next evening, Jomo stood at the door of the hut, dressed in his finest robes. His royal pendant hung from his neck, and the lion's tooth glinted in the sunlight. He held out his hand to Nia. "Come with me," he said. "There is a world I want you to see." Nia hesitated for a moment, then took his hand. They walked through the forest together, no longer as husband and wife alone, but as prince and chosen one. When they reached the hidden cave, the guards bowed low. The servants stepped aside, their heads down in respect. "She is with me," Jomo said. Inside the stone house, the lanterns glowed brighter than before. The floors had been polished, and the scent of flowers floated in the air. One servant brought water for Nia's feet. Another brought a wrapper woven with gold thread. "Welcome, princess," they said in unison. Nia's eyes widened. "I am not a princess," she whispered. Jomo looked at her. "You are." That night, Jomo gathered his advisors. He stood tall before them. "It is time," he said. "Olanga has waited long enough. I will return and reclaim my father's throne." The elders nodded. "Your people will rejoice, my prince. The evil ruler passed away just weeks ago. The throne is empty. The kingdom is waiting." Preparations began. Letters were sent. Horses were saddled. Jomo and Nia packed their things. When they returned to the village, Nia carried herself differently. She didn't walk with her head down. She stood beside her husband with pride. They traveled for days, crossing rivers and hills, until they reached the gates of Olanga. The guards recognized the royal pendant and dropped to their knees. "The prince has returned." Words spread like fire. People rushed from their homes. Old women wept. Children ran with joy. "He is alive! Our prince is alive!" Jomo stood before them in his robes, holding Nia's hand. "I have come not just to rule," he said, "but to heal." The elders of the land placed a crown on his head, the same one his father once wore. The crowd cheered, drums beat, and songs filled the sky. Then they turned to Nia. "She is the light beside our prince," they said. "She shall be our princess." A necklace of royal beads was placed around her neck. The women danced in circles, throwing petals at her feet. Nia's heart was full. The girl who once cried alone in a quiet hut was now standing on palace steps beside a king. Her life had changed in ways she never dreamed. And as the sun set behind the palace walls, she knew this was only the beginning. The news traveled faster than the wind. From market stalls to farm paths, from water wells to palm wine huts, everyone in Nia's village was talking. "Did you hear?" one woman gasped. "Nia's husband is not a poor boy. He's a prince. A real prince. With guards and golden clothes." Children ran through the village shouting, "Nia is a princess now!" When the words reached Mama Sika's ears, she dropped her calabash and fainted right there in the middle of the compound. A neighbor sprinkled water on her face until she blinked awake. "It cannot be," she whispered. "That goat boy. A prince?" But it was true. 2 days later, the royal drums were heard before the visitors arrived. Dust rose from the ground as 5 men on horses rode into the village. Behind them came a royal carriage, its sides painted with symbols of Alanga. Inside sat Nia, dressed in fine cloth, her neck heavy with beads, and her arms shining with bangles. Mama Sika stood at the doorway, her mouth dry, her hands trembling. Nia stepped down gently. Her feet touched the same soil where she once fetched water and carried firewood. Behind her, 2 guards stood tall with spears, their eyes scanning the crowd. Villagers gathered quickly, bowing and clapping. "Welcome, Princess Nia," they shouted. "You have brought honor to us." She smiled and nodded. She walked through the village, handing out wrapped gifts, cloth, soap, salt, and coins. Children danced around her. Old women blessed her. Even the chief of the village came out to greet her. But when she reached her old compound, she stopped. Mama Sika stood alone, her wrapper tied loosely, her face pale. "Nia," she said, stepping forward. I didn't know. I was only trying to." Nia looked at her calmly. Her eyes held no hate, just silence. Mama Sika fell to her knees. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I didn't mean to ruin your life." Nia bent down slightly and placed a small gift at her feet, a wrapped calabash of oil and soap. Then she stood tall again. She didn't speak a word, not even one. Mama Sika lowered her head, tears falling on the dusty ground. Nia turned and walked away. She continued giving gifts to the rest of the village, her smile bright, her steps graceful. But her silence toward Mama Sika spoke louder than 1,000 scoldings. That night, when the royal guards rode back toward the palace with Nia, the villagers waved with joy. They spoke of her kindness, her beauty, her rise. But Mama Sika sat alone in the compound, staring at the small calabash in her lap. She had pushed Nia into a poor marriage to get rid of her. Now, that same marriage had lifted Nia above them all. And it was her silence, not her crown, that burned the deepest. Nia stood beside Jomo as he sat on the throne of Alanga. The once quiet boy was now King Jomari, ruler of the land, leader of the people, voice of justice. But he never ruled alone. At every gathering, council, and celebration, Nia sat beside him. Not just as his wife, but as his partner, his strength, and his light. She wore royal robes, but always added something from her village. Bright beads her mother once wore, a woven wrapper from her girlhood, or a small calabash tied to her waist. The people noticed. They said, "Our queen has not forgotten where she came from." Nia began to change the kingdom with her heart. She built schools for girls who were once like her, forced into marriage, forgotten by family, made to feel small. She brought old women from the villages to teach wisdom, plants, and songs. She sat with girls and listened to their stories. No girl is too small, she said, and no dream is too big. Women from far lands came to learn from her. Chiefs' daughters, potters' daughters, goat herders' daughters, all sat at her feet, learning the ways of courage, kindness, and strength. Every full moon, fires were lit across Alanga, and people gathered to hear tales. "Tell us about the queen," children shouted, and the old ones would begin. She was once just a village girl. Her stepmother pushed her into a poor marriage, but her heart was pure, and her fate was waiting. Nia never returned to live in her old village. She visited only once, and that was enough. Mama Sika grew old, her back bent, her voice weaker. She often sat outside her hut, watching the road, hoping to see a royal carriage again. But it never came. "She has forgotten me," she would mutter. But the truth was, Nia had not forgotten. She had forgiven. That was why she never came back. In the palace, Nia wrote letters to distant villages, calling for peace. She taught her sons and daughters about fairness, love, and truth. She made sure the palace kitchen always fed the poor. No visitor left her court without warm food and a warm word. People from far lands came just to see her smile. They said, "She is a queen of two worlds, one of earth and one of spirit." She never wore too many jewels. She never shouted. But when she spoke, even the drums seemed to quiet. Years passed. Legends grew. And every child in Alanga learned the tale of the girl with no choice. The girl who married a poor boy. The girl who walked into a small hut and ended up in a grand palace. The girl who never asked for a crown, but wore it better than anyone. The queen whose heart was richer than gold. Queen Nia, the queen who came from nothing and became everything.